After some travel, I'm back with a video for this, the second week of December 2025. And from December 4th to December 10th, the PJM Interconnect's base residual auction is taking place to ensure sufficient capacity for the power delivery year starting May of 2027. First of all, why the heck does every grid operator have to have such arcane names for everything? It's like the legal profession, with all of its inscrutability and frankly stupid language seemingly meant to ensure we can't understand it. Per Google's Gemini, this thing is called the base residual auction, or the BRA, because it's the base auction in PJM's market held to procure the majority of needed electric capacity for the future delivery year. These auctions typically take place 3 years out into the future, with incremental auctions that occur later on to address any gaps in supply. And usually, these auctions are held by PJM to cover its 13-state territory, and they're ignored by most of us because they're somewhat arcane, and in the past, they also didn't impact energy prices all that much. But in November of 2022, something took place that would eventually change all that. That's when OpenAI launched ChatGPT 3.0. And then the AI butterfly began quietly flapping its wings. That event stimulated a great deal of activity in the space among other AI developers, even as chip manufacturer NVIDIA began manufacturing increasingly more powerful and energy-hungry chips to satisfy this burgeoning demand. Soon, the butterfly effect in the power industry became remarkably pronounced. In some states like Georgia, Indiana, Texas, Ohio, and Virginia, data center loads soared. Ohio and Virginia load sits within PJM, and suddenly the demand forecasts that had been stagnant for over a decade started to ramp up. PJM's sclerotic supply side of the equation, with the interminable interconnection queues, didn't keep up, even as the grid operator re-rated all of its supply assets to better ascertain their ability to meet demand under high-stress situations. This was prompted by the deficiencies that occurred during Winter Storm Elliot's unhappy surprise in late December of 2022. At that time, numerous assets did not show up to the pre-Christmas party, with gas generation scrooging up big time. Nearly 40 gigawatts of gas failed to show up during the worst part of that event. So with existing supply derated, almost nothing new being built, and an expanding forecast for data center loads, you have a classic Econ 101 price set situation. Take a supply curve that barely budges and shift the demand curve to the right, and voila, higher capacity prices. Well, those started to show up in July of 2024 with the auction for the 2025-2026 delivery year that started June 1st. And if you had to pay for capacity, prices were ugly. They soared from a 3-year average of $37.68 per megawatt day to $269.92. Naturally, this invited a political uproar. So Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro negotiated a deal with PJM, blessed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to put a collar on prices with a nominal floor of roughly $175 and a ceiling of $325. The following auction for the 2026-27 delivery year occurred this past July, and Shapiro's actions paid off. The clearing price came in at $329.17, the actual approved for a cap price once updated with specific auction parameters. That price was a shocker to most, but when PJM ran a simulated auction without the cap, prices soared even higher to over $388 per megawatt day. One would think that the 2027-2028 auction would have occurred a year later. But since there had been so much regulatory tussle between PJM and FERC in prior years, capacity auctions have been delayed for so long that they'll now take place every 6 months until the end of next year. So the next one, for 2028-29, is now docketed for May of 2026. Significantly, as things stand today, the cap only covers the auction that's taking place as I speak. And then, to mix metaphors, the gloves come off and anything goes in terms of prices for future capacity auctions. The 2029-30 auction is set to take place in December of 2026, with the next one returning back to the 3-year advance schedule. Get it? So what's the problem? Well, the whole point of competitive markets is to set price signals to elicit an elastic response. For example, if the cost of bread goes up 50%, more bakers jump into action. Same dynamic applies to eggs, t-shirts, or electricity supply assets. But the problem here is that those prices used to be set 3 years out to give developers sufficient time to develop those assets and put them into play. But now, with interconnection queues and supply chains being what they are, that doesn't happen anymore. I like to say in my keynotes when I talk about this, that if we're waiting for supply-side cavalry to come riding over the hill to save us on this one, then we have a problem, because the horses for that cavalry haven't even foaled yet. Meanwhile, that expected growth in PJM demand, stemming from data centers, has pushed up their forecast by 30 gigawatts by 2030. For context, June's peak demand was about 160 gigawatts. So it's that expected growth that is causing this massive inflationary push. Data load, both existing and forecast, is calculated by the third-party independent market monitor, whose job is to police the grid, to have cost all the other loads a whopping $16.6 billion over the past two auctions. And that's over half the total capacity revenues in those auctions. This now represents over a quarter of the entire competitive supply bill, so of course it's become a political hot potato, with many of the state's governors recently signing a letter indicating their lack of confidence in PJM's leadership, and other large energy consumers getting into the game as well as they fight for their own interests. Last month, after fielding multiple proposals in an effort to address this massive new data-related demand, PJM stakeholders could not agree on a path forward in terms of how to approach new interconnection proposals. What seems clear is there is absolutely no way PJM can meet firm demand, so there has to be more flexibility built into the system. This goes well beyond the concept of data centers moderating their own demand during peak periods and more into the realm of so-called BYOG, or bring your own generation, or at least bring your own capacity during peak periods so that other ratepayers aren't on the hook while the grid sees a threat to reliability. Meanwhile, the Department of Energy has also stepped into the fray, with Secretary Wright in November directing the FERC to develop a one-size-fits-all approach to the interconnection issue that would address the entire country. Naturally, the states immediately began pushing back on that one, arguing that this approach steps on state regulatory authority in a very significant way. The speed with which this new load emerged, combined with its enormous magnitude, will test the physical grid and its regulatory framework in ways we've never seen before. The pressure related to data centers and the impact of the demands, yes, it will push us close to a boiling point, and the results of the ongoing auction, to be released on the 17th, might just cause the lid to pop off the pot. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon.